Well, good morning. Today is the 31st of July 2023, and although I have made a somewhat similar video in the past offering some suggestions for rail travel and some warnings on rail travel as well, in a sense, I felt that there was a need to update that. Right now, and by the way, I'm showing a little bit of my Japan trip videos so that I don't breach any copyright rules. I would like people to be aware of the new Queensland Rail long distance train timetable that is not very satisfactory in a lot of ways, and I'd issue a couple of thoughts on that as well. And that is, with the Tilt train now departing in the evenings from Brisbane, other than on Sundays. Anyway, I just took a phone call, by the way, but I just got to get back on track. That's not being a pun, incidentally. But the biggest alert that I can give is that the Tilt train, as I was saying, actually goes in the evening now from Brisbane, and it gets into Rockhampton at a ridiculous time of 1 AM. Too long a story as to why, but they are refurbishing a set, and then they're going to refurbish the second set for mechanical reasons, and not to do with internal. You know, it's not to do with seating or the passenger facilities, it's to do with mechanical issues. Anyway, the warning, as I say, is that not only does the Tilt train go at in the evenings, 4:55 PM actually, and gets up to Rocky at 1 AM, but it only runs 5 days a week. You've got to be aware of that. The second train that runs 5 days a week, and not necessarily the same days, is the Spirit of Queensland, which goes to Cairns. So be aware of that. And in other words, if a person had decided, for example, they might like to travel on a rail bed, which is lay flat seat, up to Cairns, or they might decide also, well, I wouldn't mind having a couple of stopovers on the way back and going largely by day, there is one suggestion I'd make. But you must check the train timetables. You've got to be aware of the actual days of operation. You can go from Cairns by train down to Proserpine, get there in the evening, 7 o'clock. Every day there is a bus going from there heading towards Brisbane, but you go to Rockhampton, getting there I think 5:45 in the afternoon. The following morning at 6:45 there is the Tilt train to Brisbane. That's just a reasonable sort of trip in the first place to suggest. So you get largely daylight travel, Cairns all the way to Brisbane. But as I said, severe warning about what days the services operate. Both of those that I'm just talking about operates only 5 days a week. That is the number one warning that I would give. Another one, particularly for overseas travellers who have no idea about this and would just think, oh, I'd like to go out to Charleville, or I'd like to go to Mount Isa. Forget it. Unless you want to sit up overnight, totally forget it. The only suggestions I can make if anyone wants to ride on either the Westlander or the Inlander is you can do the daylight sections of that trip. And I'll make a following suggestion. You can travel from Brisbane out to Toowoomba by bus. Sorry, there's a little bit of footage in the background that's slightly out of focus for a moment. You can travel out from Brisbane to Toowoomba by bus, by Greyhound, and I'm going to do it at some point from Ipswich to Toowoomba, by the way. I'm getting another phone call. Oh, well, okay. I had a couple of phone calls then, but that was fine, and I'm actually quite pleased to report, as it were, that Queensland Rail are examining, I guess you'd say, or planning to have a new Spirit of the Outback train. Now, that, don't get excited, as the saying goes. That could be a couple of years away. It could be 18 months or 2 years away, basically, at least, let's say. But the important part for me is if they do that, they will put the sleeping cars back onto the Westlander and on the, that's the Brisbane to Charleville train, and onto the Townsville to Mount Isa train. It's the Inlander. And I had just been discussing that to do the daylight section of that one at the moment involves taking the Spirit of Queensland up to Townsville with a rail bed, and getting into town. You could go into town and do things a bit because your train leaves around 12:40 in the afternoon, and you go to Charters Towers, where you get up there about 3 or so. Then you stay overnight. Now, opposite McDonald's is a bus that takes people to the Townsville airport. But also it goes into town in the sense of you can get off at the Townsville railway station. It doesn't go right downtown. However, you can either walk into town or take a local bus into the heart of Townsville. The other suggestion, briefly, I've got many, you might say, but this is a trip that is, I recommend it, is a trip out to Mount Surprise in North Queensland. Now you think, well, why would that be? Well, that's the Savannah Lander. If you haven't done that train, that's a great trip in itself, and there's a 6-day version of the trip that includes a bus up to, you go up to the Gulf, you can come to Normanton, and then you go by the Gulf Lander down to Croydon. Then there's a bus to Forsyth. Now all of this is actually the most recommended trip in Australia, I'd say. And you do the Cobalt Gorge and the Savannah Lander down to Mount Surprise, and of course to Cairns. But if you want just a brief a test, a little trial, an example of that trip, which is one of the best in Australia, you go to Cairns, whether by train or by air. You then take the bus. Now there is something it's very early in the morning. For most people, at 6:30 a.m. is a bit too early. So my suggestion is rather unique in a way. There are buses out from Cairns to Atherton in the Tablelands. So you can get a bus at 9:30 in the morning, or you can get one at 3:30 or so in the afternoon. It's a trip of a couple of hour and a half, 2 hours, or whatever it is, exactly. I think 2 hours. Out to Atherton. Then the following day, you get the bus to Mount Surprise, and then after that, that's to be exact. Thursdays you do that, Fridays you get to Mount Surprise, and Saturday morning, Mount Surprise back to Cairns. And it's a very scenic and enjoyable trip on the Savannah Lander. The most important warning and advice on the train, you need to book. It's like when you're doing Spirit of Queensland with the rail beds and or the Savannah Lander train, 2 to 3 months in advance is an absolute requirement, or you will ring them up and find out that train is booked out, either one we're talking about here. So the most enjoyable train and travel experience in all of Australia is that 6-day tour I've been telling you about, from Cairns up to Corumba and Croydon and Forsyth. But many overseas people in particular, but even many Australian travellers would say, oh, I can't do 6 days. So you're talking about literally a 2-day, 3-day trip in a sense. Thursday through to Saturday is quite achievable. It's quite reasonable. There are many more suggestions, and if I hear from people that they'd like some more suggestions, I'd be happy to make a follow-up video on this. But my last thoughts on the subject of trains and connections is, in Australia and in the United States, by the way, you absolutely never book a connection of under 4 hours for anything, whether it's a train or a plane or a bus. I would even suggest 6 hours, particularly in the United States, because you're going to be sorely disappointed when your train runs so late that you don't make the connection. And I've seen this in Australia, and I've seen it in the United States. I'm quite aware of it. So, okay, folks, well, there's just a few ideas and a few warnings to think about, and perhaps make a follow-up video sometime. So, thank you for viewing.